Hi, everyone. I'm John Lux. I'm the Executive Director of Film Florida, and welcome to another edition of Film Florida Friday. Film Florida Fridays are interactive conversations about current topics, initiative, and relationship building in Florida's film, television, commercial, and digital media production industry. Today, we're talking about camera assistants and production audio. Panelists will discuss what they do, how they found their way into the roles, training involved, who they interact with most with on set, and more. In a moment, we're going to have everybody introduce themselves, and I'll ask a few questions to get things going. During that time, we're going to ask that everybody keep their microphones on mute to avoid background noise. After we've gotten through initial questions, we're going to open it up to the audience for questions and conversation. At that time, though, please use the hand raising function so we can call on you. We want this to be conversational and interactive, but we also don't want everybody talking over each other. We're going to ask everyone keep their questions brief and in the interest of time and out of the fairness to others that want the opportunity. As always, Film Florida Fridays are free, but we hope you'll consider donating $20.23 for our 2023 fundraising campaign. The donation link will be posted in the chat box throughout the discussion, and you can also find that on our website. With that, I want to introduce our guests. We have Sean Gilbert and Jennifer Gallipolt, who are our featured camera assistants. And our sound mixers are Joe Foglia and Michael Helms. So with that, let's get started. Sean, I want to start with you. Can you explain the specific duties of a camera assistant? What does your typical day look like in your role?
Yeah, I feel like the jobs, when I get the call that, that the important part of my job is to ask a lot of questions. I think probably everybody on here can agree. What are we doing? Is it a feature? Is it a documentary? Is it a commercial? And you figure out the logistics and and what you're doing and who you're working for. And then once you've signed on to that, I take the bull by the horns and I get involved, before the prep even happens. So I typically will, get in touch with the DP. Sometimes you'll get a list directly from the DP. Sometimes it's through a producer or UPM. But I look over that list and I try to, ask as many questions as I can, what we're doing. So I look over the list and you're basically working for the director of photography. You're his right-hand man. You're covering all, his tracks basically and making sure he's covered. And you're working with the production to keep things within the budget, whatever that budget may be. So I get involved in pre-production with the camera order basically. By asking questions and then dealing directly with the rental house. And sometimes the gear comes from other sources, so you kind of have to put the pieces of the puzzle together. So it begins there, and then hiring the crew to back me up. A lot of times they'll give me the option to hire the crew. Multiple crews based on if it's a multiple camera. Backs that we cohesively work as a unit, and then we go into the prep mode. And the prep I consider the most important part of the job. Would say so. Going in and making sure that all the gear is there, organizing, labeling, checking all the gear out, making sure all the functions work, and that you're covered for any type of scenario. Based on what the shot list is, or in the schedule that you're getting, and finding out the logistics of where you're working. Are you working on the beach? Are you working, in a stage? That helps you in the prep to prepare. So then we prep all the gear, and then I like to be ready at the prep to walk off the truck and shoot. So if the call time's 7 a.m., then you should be shoot ready by 7:05, 7:10. A lot of times that's keeping the cameras built. The seconds help organize the carts, or if it's a mule or whatever it is, when we get off the truck, we'll be shooting on the beach and being ready to go. And once your ear open to the DP, getting involved, being in communication with the rest of your team. Usually we have walkies with headsets so that we keep it, low key, and that wherever we're at, we can communicate with each other if we're spread out. And then, knowing the day schedule, getting the sides for the day, knowing, what we're doing throughout the day so that we can prepare and anticipate and be moving in the direction we need to, as the day moves forward. And then, like I said, my boss is a DP, so I'm there to service him and to help him look good, is what I always say, and to make sure that he feels covered in that aspect. And then during the shoot is basically focus pulling. So setting up the camera with whatever setup there is on a dolly, Steadicam, whatever we're doing, and then knowing the shot by watching the rehearsal. If you get a rehearsal, a lot of times we don't get rehearsals these days. We call them roll rehearsals. But if you feel like you're not ready, then you have to speak up. Hey, I need to see a rehearsal. What's happening. It's up to you to ask the questions so that the first take is good for you and for everybody else, focus wise. And then focus pulling, I consider that the creative part. It's technical, but it's a creative part of our job because you're telling a story basically through focus. And knowing what the shot is, knowing who's in the shot, reading the sides, who's got the dialogue, it determines where you set focus. And a lot of times you have that freedom unless you get specific instructions from a director or DP or an operator. So you can be creative, and a lot of times you make decisions that maybe they wouldn't, but they may like them better than what they determined. So that's basically the gist of it. And then obviously making sure whether you're shooting film or digital, that the media or the film is taken care of, and with your second and your loader, your media manager, your DIT, that everything is, that you keep everything safe and organized for post-production. And then maintaining the gear, having for weather, keeping the gear clean. That's efficient, basically making sure that you're either ready for the next day or you're sending the gear back in the in the condition that it was given to you in. It's pretty much the gist of it. I can talk about it probably for a lot longer because there's a lot of scenarios, but that's pretty much the gist of a first assistant duties.
Good.
And I can, so.
Good. Yeah, and we'll get into some of the other stuff. Jen, I want to go to you real quick. Tell us how you got your started as a camera assistant.
That's funny because when I was starting, I used to ask everybody that question, and everybody has a completely different answer. And it's not the typical career where you go to school, you get a degree, you interview, and you get a job. People would tell me they were on a boat and they knew a guy, and so it was. There was no direct line to being in this business. And I guess I got lucky, like most of us probably did at some point. You have an opportunity, but then you have to be ready for it. I went to film school because I didn't know how else to get in the business. But it's by no means required. Never really that hasn't helped me get ahead, but it did introduce me to people. I went to UCF, and Panavision was still in Orlando, so I spent a lot of time at Panavision. I mean, college is what you make of it. So I tried to take advantage of the opportunities that being in school gave me, the resources, the people introduced me to, and then when I graduated, I tried to tap into a lot of those resources. I had a chance to be an office PA on a movie called Canvas with Marsha Gay Harden and Joey Pantaleone. And they brought in a DP from 6 Feet Under who was a big fan of Panavision. And they were looking for a loader and they didn't have a lot of money. And I just was in the right place at the right time. And I talked to DP with the permission of the office, and he was like, okay, if the camera team's okay with it, we'll give it a shot. And after that experience, I was able to get into a rental house, which was the best thing I could have done because I was horrible as a PA. I learned that really quick. And those were at the time the two avenues to really being in the field. And at the rental house, I learned more about Airflex, which is more prominent in Miami as a camera system. And more importantly, I met all of the people I needed to meet. And the person who owned the rental house I was working at was super supportive. Her mentality was, the better the people at the rental house did, the better her employees did, the better her rental house looked as a starting ground and as a successful business. So she was super supportive. I remember early on, Burn Notice would last minute add cameras for explosions just to make sure they got the shot. And they would call like at 2 or 3 o'clock in the afternoon to find people. And we were busy, so there wasn't always someone who could run over there. So they would call Eileen and I would have a chance to take a camera and run out there for that shot. And that was one of the first opportunities I had to be on a real big set. So a lot of luck, but a lot of, I think, work and trying to be ready for those opportunities that presented themselves, so that I didn't mess them up. But there's no direct path, which is frustrating, which is the answer I wanted when I was starting.
Mm-hmm.
And that doesn't exist. So that was
Well,
my
it's funny when people ask me
introduction.
about, it's funny when people ask me about advice for the, getting into the industry. I always tell them, be at the right place at the right time and then don't screw it up. So it sounds like.
Yes, exactly. That was the long version of that answer. Exactly.
Joe, I want to go to you. Oh, actually, no, Michael, I want to start with you. From the production audio standpoint, how did you get your start? And give us some of the high level main responsibilities of a sound mixer on set.
Well, I kind of had an interesting start as well, as I ended up going to Full Sail and did their audio engineering program. And then I ended up in New York City working in a recording studio and a lot of music work. And then I later shifted over to more advertising and working with kind of almost like a post audio work, a lot of promo work for shows or for networks like HBO and the Sci-Fi Channel. We were recording VO and adding sound effects and music and, for, coming up next type stuff. And so I really kind of enjoyed that. And then later I moved back to Florida and had my own studio for a while and started working on, local projects and getting out in the field and doing production sound. And I really enjoyed that side. So it's kind of been a journey there. And, but to, talk about what a production sound mixer basic overview is, we're trying to record good, clean dialogue on set. We're using wireless microphones and boom mics, and we're working closely with the camera department. We're putting, time code sync boxes on the camera so it matches the time code on our mixers. What else? We want to sync up and post as easily as possible. We also send audio to, the director and other people who need to listen back. We're usually responsible for the slates and, we have the smart slates and, just trying to make sure everything, lines up. So in post, it goes smooth.
Good. And Joe, let's jump over to you. Tell us about, getting started in your career and how you've built such a, long and successful career in production audio.
Sure. Thank you. I appreciate that. My career kind of went through so many aspects before I got to where I'm at now. I kind of began sweeping the floors, so to say. I went to school for computer technology, and I worked for a company in Fort Lauderdale called Modular Computer Systems, and we had built scientific computers for Jet Propulsion Laboratories, which we tracked the space shuttle around the globe. I was in charge of troubleshooting in the field, so I gained a lot of troubleshooting knowledge at the computer firm. At the computer firm, I ended up meeting a gentleman who is still around today, and he's a musician. He and I, Peter Yanilos, started a company called Artisan Recorders, where we built a 24-foot multi-track, dual 24-track analog mixing bus, sort of say. And we got a lot of work in the recording field on location, and did several concerts back in the day when Peter Frampton was quite popular with his songs live in concert, and did several artists, traveled around, and then I jumped over from artisan recorders and maneuvered over to Criteria Recording Studios, which is in North Miami. Very successful studio, still around today, still friends. I just did a couple more songs over there for a couple of friends of mine back last year. So I gained a lot of professional recording knowledge, unlike unfortunately going to school. I wasn't able to do that, and back then we didn't have such a place called Full Sail, and I think the only recording school was the University of Miami, who had the recording department. And so I learned all my chops from the ground up. So I married the two of location recording with music and with my studio knowledge of microphones and multi-track layout. Things went kind of south when they introduced this little round silver thing called a CD. And when they did that, everybody got kind of scared that the industry was going to go sideways. And so I started looking for a different avenue for career choice. Again, not really knowing much, but knowing a lot of people. South Florida was my home. I loved living here. It was a great place to be and to grow up. Went to Pompano Beach Senior High School. So that's how far back I go there. So I went into live events for ABC and NBC and CBS and ESPN. I was what they call an A1. I started out as an A2, where we would just run mics all over a golf course, to soccer games, to Super Bowls. I got shipped off to a few foreign countries. One, we did the Pan American World Games in South America. So I gained some more knowledge of miking in the field and knowing how to hustle and, you know, getting audio signal from the 18th hole all the way back to a truck, up to a satellite, and down to New York, which then broadcasted out. So all that knowledge kind of formulated to a place then, like you're talking about lucky situations. When I was in Criteria Recording Studios, I worked with this band and a few musicians. One musician was a gentleman named Dickie Betts. He used to play with the Allman Brothers, and there were a bunch of people in the studio I made friends with. One of them was Don Johnson, who I knew from the studio, because believe it or not, Don's a pretty talented songwriter. And there was an opportunity where the show Miami Vice, and there was a David Nutter. I guess maybe you all heard of his name. Is a famous director now, but he came from the University of Miami. My ex-wife, Ginny Morrow, who was involved in the University of Miami quite a bit, he and David did his thesis with Don Johnson in Miami, and it was called Ceasefire, and Ceasefire was very popular. So Don Johnson was the lead in that. My wife, not at that time, arranged for Don to do a read over at Miami Vice. So everything kind of came together on the third season. To come back, and then Don says, now Nagra, which is an analog tape recorder that is no longer in use, although it's making its comeback sometime. They brought me on to do season 3, 4, and 5 of Miami Vice, which kickstarted my career. And from then out, the rest is history of all the shows that I've done. In Miami, I did a movie a long time ago called Scared Stiff. My very first one was 1984, called Knights of the City. And it was it was a breakdance movie. It was shot in Fort Lauderdale. And little did I know at the time, it was a mob boss's son who was laundering money did this film, because I couldn't figure out why Smokey Robinson was in it, and Sammy Davis Jr. showed up. But nevertheless, that's my first feature film in Fort Lauderdale. I got my little timeline up here in 1987, that was. Then went to 21 Jump, Cop and a Half in Tampa, another show called Gulf City. And then I hooked up with Burt Reynolds and did The Maddening. And then we did Flipper down in the Keys and in Bland. I mean, there was so much work in Florida, and it's very sad to see where we are today. One of my favorite films was The 1st of May with it wasn't for the money, it was for the love of Paul and making a film. And believe it or not, several years past, they did it and surprisingly got a check for money from them. And one of my first very successful, although I did get a win on Miami Vice as far as nomination goes for an Emmy, I also got it for From the Earth to the Moon, another huge series that HBO did here in Orlando with Tom Hanks and Brian Grazer. I got 3 Emmy nominations for sound on that. And it just kept growing from there. And then because our government decided to pull our funding for our state, it forced me to go to California. And then from that point out, I've been just working show after show in Los Angeles. And that's basically how I got my start.
There you go. A lot of good nuggets in there. Let's, Sean, I want to go back over to you and talk about the importance of the collaborative environment between the camera and the sound department. Like, somebody asked me, like, why are we pairing camera assistants in production audio? But talk a little bit about the overall collaboration, but specifically between camera and sound departments.
Sure. Yeah. So, once again, going back to the prep, it's important to know whether you're, if it's a commercial, sometimes you're not shooting sound or a second unit, but to find out if there's dialogue and if sound is indeed on the job, that's a question I definitely ask. And if so, you need to make sure that you have them covered with the pieces that that are part of the camera package. For instance, like an A box, which is basically the sound for XLR plugin. And then that you have the menus, and the menus on each different camera. There's so many cameras now, the digital cameras, that the menus, so that on the day, if it's a new camera that a sound mixer or sound department hasn't used, that you can help navigate with them on the day to make sure that the camera is recording sound. They have sound bars and whatnot, and give them time. At the beginning of the day, you gotta know that they're not going to be at the prep with you, and at the beginning of the day they're going to come up and put time code in, or a box, or whatever on the camera. Make sure that they have space to do that, and that they have the time to do that. And then make sure during the day, if we are jamming time code, I typically try to have that time code cable for that specific camera. Now that there's so many, and as part of our package, so there's no surprises for them. And then throughout the day, make sure that the cameras indeed has time code. Help them out. Sometimes when you power down the camera, you lose time code, or if it's long periods of time. So to make sure the time code is there. The other thing is make sure you give these guys good, loud, and visible slates. The sound department. That's the second AC's job, but make sure that the slate's labeled for them, properly and organized and legible and to be, put the slate, front and center, so that, post-production can see it and slap it, and be conscientious of, obviously, if you're with, there's an actor there, there's a microphone, that you're not blowing out people's ears. And then communicate reloads with them, let them know when, camera's reloading. And, just basic communication with these guys. And then obviously, if they're booming the shot, I try to help the boom operator out, framing wise, you can come over and look at my monitor. He'll ask me what lens we're on. I'll kind of give him, some guidance during the rehearsal, whether he's in or not, or he's casting shadows. I try to keep my eyes open for those guys to help them out, because you're a team and you're a unit, with everybody on set. So that's pretty much what I can think of as far as collaborative parts between us.
Good. Jennifer, I want to jump over to you. Sean had mentioned something. Talk a little bit about the role of a second AC and how it differs from the first AC.
Yeah, as far as slating go, that definitely is more in the second AC book. And I probably deal with sound more than Sean would, in the sense that we're communicating throughout the day to make sure the slate and what the recorder is recording match, because once post gets it, that's pretty important. Also on set, there are different cues that a second will give while slating, because the sound's only hearing what you're doing. They don't obviously see what you're doing. That's all on camera. So if I'm slating for a camera, I make sure to call that out, so that when the person listening to that audio recording knows that clap is for the A camera. There could be multiple cameras in a room, and you might not automatically know which sound that camera is going to go to. If I only have one slate for multiple cameras, I'll call common sticks, so they know that mark is for all of the cameras in the room. Making sure, that the slate and the sound are in sync as far as they say the same thing. If it's off speed, marking that on the slate, so they're not looking for sound that might be associated with that take, because obviously there wouldn't be any if we're shooting at like 60 frames a second. That's a huge part of seconding, and presenting the slate in a way that's easy to see, which we usually go off the millimeter of the camera. So the rule of thumb traditionally is, if you're using like a 50 mil lens, you're about 5 feet away, and it gives it a nice frame for the editor to look at, so that they can match everything properly, not squinting to see the slate all the way across the room. And if you're in close to an actor, usually you do soft sticks, so that you're not going to jar the actor right before their performance with a loud noise. And then also they can look for that soft click, and they're not looking for some loud. If they're just scrubbing through a timeline, they might be looking for like a loud pop. It's not going to be there. So you warn them it's going to be a soft sound. So that's a big part of second AC. We used to do camera reports a lot more religiously. Now it kind of depends on the job, because metadata exists and it's not always as necessary to be so specific, but we still do a camera report so that there's some information that goes with that card, with in case there's any questions about focal length. And if there's special effects on set, we especially make sure to record every little element of where the camera is in relation to the talent and what lens. But the second AC, really, I think the biggest job is to be organized. The first really focus pulling, Sean just kind of like went right over that. That is not something that is easy by any means. Constantly they're watching and focusing, and in that moment, I tried and failed, and it's not anything I aspired to do. I'm going to be a lifetime second. It's very difficult. So me being organized, I think, helps the first to worry about one less thing. If they need something, I know where it is. I know how to access it quickly. I make sure what we have, if we're doing a car shot, I make sure we have everything we need. It's not something that Sean would need to worry about. You make sure, and they do. I mean, it's really a collaborative process, and we check each other, but for the most part, you try to think ahead and anticipate for them. So it's not something they have to focus on, that you have a bag full of everything they could possibly need without you even hopefully asking for it. And then marks are a big part of what I do, setting good marks for a first, so that if it's a really hard focus pull, and Sean can speak to that on his end, I guess, but putting marks down can sometimes help make it a little easier. And depending on where you are, you need different marks for obviously sand, or if you're in the street, maybe you need chalk. We have different types of ways to mark actors so that they hopefully hit their marks, which is not always the case. I could put marks down and they could be in vain. But I think just like anticipation, being organized, communication are probably the biggest parts of being a second, and trying to help the first to the best of my ability. Because really on the day, the pressure's on the first AC. While the camera's rolling, they're working, and very few people are in that position to be affecting the shot directly as it's happening. So I just want to make sure that when the camera rolls, he's set up to be in the best position, or she is set up to be in the best position possible on the day.
Good. Jude and Matthew, I see you guys have your hands up. We're going to get through just a few more questions, but you guys will be first when we get to the audience section. Michael, I want to jump back over to you. I know one of your missions is to help educate others on how to record the best sounding dialogue on set and the importance of providing good quality audio for post-production. Touch on how you've helped some others through the years, and how the foundation of your background in music and post-production has helped with those efforts.
Well, honestly, the phrase "we'll fix it in post" was never my favorite. So I've always tried to, if you've ever had to try to fix bad sound after the fact, it's a horrible experience, and it can be expensive. And so, if the budget doesn't allow for, decent post audio mix, then it can be a mess, for the video editor to try to fix things. So I've had an opportunity to talk with editors, and for those that don't have a budget, and kind of work with them on delivering the best sound, from the start. We're doing the best sound we can on set to pass off to post, and just because I know how difficult it is. So, the studio background, you work in these environments where, it's a soundproof studio, everything's nice, there's no reflections there, and then you get out in the field, and of course there's all sorts of challenges of being on location. But working with editors and, talking to them about, a lot of them don't know a lot about compression and adding that to the tracks and cleaning things up and EQ. And so I just, when the opportunity arises, I try to share some of those, more post audio techniques that they may or may not know. And and just be open to, reaching out. Like I've had some editors reach out and say, "Oh, you provided so many options for me when I was editing the project." So whether it was boom or wires or whatever. So just, covering the bases so they have everything they need to get the job done right.
Yeah, good. Now let's just go around the grid a little bit and just give, one piece of advice that if somebody listening wants to get into that specific specialty, whether it's an AC or a sound. Joe, let's start with you. Quick, one piece of advice for somebody that wants to follow in your footsteps.
My advice, I think, would be try to learn everybody's job. As a sound mixer, I think the only thing different about a sound mixer on set is we have to learn to interface with every single crew member. There's always things that are needed from the sound department. We're like the little gnats that go around your head during the summertime. It just gets to be annoying sometimes. But unfortunately, we have to interface with wardrobe, and we have to interface with makeup sometime, and hide mics and hair. We have to sometime go to Earl Perk and ask them for a piece of something, a duvetine, or maybe a rope, or we need to go to camera and ask for frame lines, like the gentleman said earlier, Sean. So as a sound department, we're probably the only small department on a production that, and when I say small, we have the least amount of people in our department. We have normally 3, sometimes 2, very rare 2, and on great occasions we have 4. But we need something from everybody, and we will not be rude to anybody. I stress that to my crew, and anybody who's worked with me. I only have top-notch people, and we have to interface with the actors and construction department and Teamsters. So It's really tough. That's my bit of advice. I think everybody should be respectful of each other's position when you're working on a set.
Sean, how about you? What's your best advice?
So my first thing is, know what you're getting into. Do you like the job? Go out as an intern, or go spend time on a set as a PA and watch and look at the different departments. That, if the camera department is something that you're looking at and you say, I love this, this is what I want to do, then go for it. There's definitely opportunities. Don't ever let anybody tell you can't do it. It's about persistence, but make sure you go in with an open mind to learn. I'm still learning and adapting after 30 years. It's a constant learning process and adapting to the times and the technology. And the most important thing is to learn the right way and from the right people. Jen mentioned working in a rental house. I did the same. I came out of a rental house for 3 years. I feel like the training that I got in those 3 years from working with multiple ACs and then the people in the rental house, it was invaluable. And when I left, I felt like I had a leg up on people that didn't come through the rental house process, and I still feel that way. And I met a lot of people. I think you had Pete Zuccarini on as one of your panelists, and I have a 25-year relationship working with Pete underwater. I met him when I was in the rental house. He knew that I liked underwater and I knew the housings. And when I came out, he grabbed me, and we've been working together since. And out hustle the competition. I'm going to hire you if you have a good attitude, and I see that you are willing to go above and beyond what's asked of you. People like Jen and my second that I use a lot, Carla. And when I was coming up, I kind of consider it old school, but guys like Anthony Zabelli and Mike, we came to the preps as seconds, not getting paid. We showed up. If we weren't working, we showed up for the first, and I learned a lot there. And I just try to let them know, hey, you've put me on this job. I'm giving back to you by trying to help you, do the best job you can do as a first assistant, or as a second assistant if you're coming in as a loader. Those old school methods, I think, are still to this day invaluable to implement to get into the field.
Good. Michael, one piece of advice for you.
So I would say, especially if you're starting off, go all in and just immerse yourself with everything production sound. I mean, I tell people always, I want to do what you want to do. I say, read books, watch videos, get on set. Here in Central Florida, we have the Orlando Independent Filmmaker Group, and they're shooting all the time, and you can jump on as a volunteer, you can learn. So, I mean, you can't beat that kind of stuff. And then get involved with groups and networks such like, Film Florida and Women in Film and Television. There's so many different options out there just to kind of meeting other people. Every job you work on, you meet a new, there's some familiar faces, and then there's some people you've never met. So connect with them, and it grows from there.
Good. And Jen, last for you, advice?
Yeah, I would say get on as many sets as you can, and just watch and find the people you respect and the people that you admire and emulate them, and don't constantly try to sell yourself to them. That's not necessary. That's not what they want. They just want you to listen and learn. And it's kind of a little bit like being in a foxhole, I would imagine. Not that I've been in a foxhole, but you're there and you're paying attention, and you'll see sometimes what needs to be done. And it might be nothing for hours, and then suddenly you're invaluable. And that moment of being aware and alert and invaluable will get you the next one. So you don't always have to be advertising yourself or promoting yourself. You just have to, I think, watch and listen and be alert and be available.
Good. All right, we're gonna do a couple of audience questions, and then we'll get back to some of our scripted questions. So Jude, I am going to spotlight you so you can come down and everybody can see you. Go ahead and take yourself off of mute and go ahead and ask your question. There you go. Unmute.
There
There
we
you go.
Sorry,
There you go.
having a little issue there. Thank you, everyone. This is really awesome. And I have two questions. One I hope is really quick, which is regarding slating. On every set I've been on, that's always been an issue that it needs to be accurate and perfect and beautiful, blah, blah, blah. Do you have any, you know how sometimes they're electric versus you write on it? Okay, I've seen both. Is there a thumbs up or thumbs down? That's my first question real quick.
I mean, my personal preference with digital is they lag a little, and sometimes they're kind of hard to reset. They take time. Time's not always a thing that you have on a film set. There's kind of a system with me, at least, with the tangible ones where I automatically will reset it so I know what number's up next and I'm good to go. The digital ones could just be a little bit more difficult to mess with, but they're an option. I think they're a cheaper option and you have to work with your resources. That's my end. I'm sure audio would have their perspective as well.
Cool. Question 2 was regarding data and media. Okay, I just bought a red Komodo, and the data cards are $500 a piece, as I'm sure you all know. So I bought one extra one, but one data card only holds 30 minutes of 4K, I believe is the way this is. So I've been noticing that the data manager is as important, in my humble opinion, as Sean and Michael and you know, because without that person, whatever we have all done together is lost. So I'm just wondering if any of y'all have, you know, anybody that you think, you know, are there people that do you regularly work with the same data person? Like, are you involved in that decision on a production, Sean? When you're hiring your whole crew, are you the one that picks the data person?
It varies from job to job. Sometimes I'm asked for who I recommend. Sometimes they're already booked. Sometimes, and there's different people that handle that. So that's important. So sometimes you have a full crew where you have a first, a second, a DIT, right? Who's basically helping the DP set looks and exposure.
That's the person, DIT, yeah.
Yeah, and a media manager, loader. So that, you know, a crew of 4. So that media manager, that's all his job is at that point. But then there's times where it's just maybe Jen and I, and she's my second, and it's a smaller budgeted commercial, for instance, and they have her managing the media. So, you know, we'll have to allot for her to, she'll pick times and kind of know where we're at, how much media we have and how much we're shooting. And she will determine whether or not, you know, she needs to leave set to go and dump cards so that we don't get into a situation where, you know, we're short or we're, you know, on the edge of running out of media. And that's part of the prep too, to make sure you ask the questions, hey, what are we shooting? Are we shooting high speed? Then, you know, I'm gonna order more cards, and then Jen's gonna have them get hard drives that are fast hard drives, so that we can keep up with, you know, the demands that we're dealing with on the day. Does that answer your question?
Yes, but whatever more I have to ask would have to be offline because it's too involved.
Yeah.
Well, your situation too with one card, that's really scary because if you have a card error, you're stuck for the day. You might be better off just renting a couple to kind of play it safe, but you definitely want a quick connection, a quick computer, quick card readers, and SSD drives. So you want everything to be as fast as possible. And if you're working with 1 or 2 cards, I would reload as frequently as possible so you're not bogged down trying to offload 500 to fill a card. It might kind of help with the workflow as well if you're only dealing with a couple cards.
So I think the key is to get the right crew so that, you know, you can maximize. And
you're going to get experience is what you're going to get.
Yeah. And one last question, which is this: I have chance, I live in Melbourne Beach, which is a very hard place to work in because the work isn't here. I have a chance to move to Orlando. Would you do it if you were me?
So you live in Melbourne, would you move to Orlando? I mean,
My husband
you
already
know,
works there, so.
yeah. I mean, that's a question. I mean, you know,
It's a big thing, but I mean, it sounds like Michael went to Full Sail.
Yeah.
Y'all are working all the time in Orlando, and it seems like there is work there and learning opportunities for me, and I can't go back to college. I mean, you know, I'm old. So, you know, that's just, it's a big thing, and I'm thinking, because you're all in Florida, I'd just throw it out there to you. What do you think, Joe? Joe's on mute, I guess.
There I am. I look at Florida as one big city.
Yeah.
If I got a phone call yesterday from a gentleman that I know, and he says, I got 3 days of work and we got to leave right now. It's in Miami. I'm in Orlando.
Right.
I centralized myself in Orlando. I was on a show, Bad Monkey. I ended up being on that show for however many months it was in Miami. So I don't look at it. I think where you live, it's an hour drive to Orlando. That's
it's
nothing.
Really far from everybody. That's the problem, honestly.
Well, I don't think it is far from everybody. I mean, yeah, you can centralize yourself from living in Orlando and then you can go, you know, either east or west. It's good, but I don't view it as being far.
Well, a lot of people, there's a lot of production going on in Tampa right now. So that's why I'm, you know.
Yes. If you get jobs on it, that's great. But I mean, to move to Orlando to work in Tampa is still, you know, an hour to 2 hours. So
right.
So,
It would
Jude, we can do a real estate show, maybe one of the future Film Florida Fridays. But I'm gonna put you back up, and I would actually advise you to. 2 months ago, we did a whole Film Florida Friday where we had DITs on, DITs. So definitely check that one out for your media management question. Matthew, I'm gonna pull you down, add your spotlight, and go ahead and unmute yourself and ask your question.
Okay, I have a couple questions, but I'll make them real short. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Mhm.
Yeah, awesome. So I'm a film composer, so it's nice to hear from the sound engineers. That's great. So Joe, I had a quick question for you. You mentioned I'm just making sure I'm correct. You didn't go to school at Full Sail. You just taught yourself all these things.
Self-taught.
Okay. All right. So I'm self-taught too, and I'm a composer for film. So as I mentioned, how did you do that? And what are some of the resources you used to teach yourself?
I just learned back in the 70s and 80s when you didn't have all the resources that everybody has now, including the internet. I mean, I just learned and bought equipment and worked and 24/7 just focused on what I like to do, and it was sound. And what my point was earlier, it didn't matter what sound it was, as long as it was sound. It was either television broadcast or commercials or features or television shows. It didn't matter. All I wanted to do was immerse myself with sound.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's great. And networking, I guess, helped with that too. One more question I had for Joe and Michael. Actually, Michael, I have Asperger's, Michael, and just wondering, it's interesting that you said
Yes, you know, so many these days, a lot more resources. So, but yeah, sometimes you get advice that may or may not be accurate, and you just kind of have to, if you keep accuracies, maybe they're true. What's legit, what's not legit. So
because I have trouble finding people that will teach me in the right way. And I mean, I know a lot about film music, obviously, I'm just factually speaking, but you know, whenever I want to learn something new, it's hard for me to, you know, find somebody to say things in the right way and stuff like that, and vice versa. So it's hard. But anyway, that's all the questions I have. One more last little thing is there any way I could, Joe and Michael, because you guys are the two sound engineers, Can I share my website with you on or off of this meeting sometime? I can, okay. Okay, I just wondered how I could do that.
I think, John, can I give you permission to post whatever information about me? You're welcome to do that.
Oh,
Okay. Yeah, and
okay, in the
I
chat.
have
window?
Go ahead.
You're good?
I can send you my website.
Great.
Or you can Google me.
All right, cool. Thank
It'll
you.
come up.
All right.
You're welcome.
all right, I just want to hit one of the questions. Michael, let me ask you this one. It says from the chat, when meeting a sound recordist for the first time, what are the two most important questions to ask about their skills or methods?
That's a good one. You know, a lot of times, you know, when you start talking with somebody, you can figure out in a few minutes what knowledge level. So you know, you can kind of figure it out. But you know, the big thing is just being willing to learn. Sometimes, you know, you try not to talk too much when you're on set, you know, when you're learning, I guess. You're just listen, make a list of all these questions that you have later. But I think the big thing is just attitude, because if you do not have a good attitude, that's like a red flag right there.
Good, good. Samantha, I'm gonna go ahead and add you down here. Go ahead and unmute yourself and ask your question.
Thank you very much. My name is Samantha Counts. I'm the program director for the Cinematic Arts degree at Kaiser University in West Palm. And one of the things I always struggle with is telling my students or communicating to my students that, yes, they could take our degree, but some of the jobs that they may be interested in, as some of you were talking about, you don't necessarily need to go to school to, you know, be successful in some of these positions. But at the same time, it's my job. So something I kind of wanted to pose to y'all is, for those of you that did go to college for this, or in Joe, in your case, in computers, what do you wish your professors had told you about the industry?
Who's going to take that one?
Go ahead, Jen.
I mean, my professors, I think a lot of them tried to make it in the industry and failed. So the byproduct of that is they were kind of a little bitter about the industry, at least my personal experience. They discouraged us, which was effective, because when you get into the industry, you're going to be discouraged at every turn anyway. So if you can't handle that, they were pretty upfront about the odds of making it. At the time, it was film, so it was pretty tight knit. But then when you stuck around, I mean, they really were resources for us. They, any experience they had, they shared. Most of it was maybe in a private setting. And I think the biggest element of college for me personally was it gave me access. So I could use that college calling card and go to Panavision and say, hey, I want an internship here. Or at the time, Blair Witch Project had come out of UCF, and the guys had formed a production company, and I could go there and say, hey, I go to UCF. Can I, intern at your production company? There were local cinematographers in the area. I was able to say, hi, I'm a college student, is it okay? And it just sort of gave me access, which, it's maybe in the arts. So I took full advantage of just putting my foot in as many doors as possible. A lot of what I learned was outside of the classroom. But I enjoyed what I was learning in the classroom too. We did a lot of just like watching films. And if you're a film fan, you're gonna, get something out of that. And you could talk about auteurs and all that kind of stuff and camera angles and just kind of it opens doors as well. But yeah, I think for me, most of the benefit came from outside the classroom.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Samantha. Joe, I want to go to you, and let's talk technology. Obviously, you've been in the industry for a long time, so things have changed quite a bit. What's the most important technological advancement that you've seen in the last 20, 25 years?
The computerization, basically, on how digitizing gives you the ability to do more with the end product. I was working on a little project that was a training film just recently at a post house, and I was doing some post audio work. I was hired to take care of the background noise. That somebody, this large corporation who installed this power plant in Cuba on Guantanamo, was doing a training film, and they used cell phones for the whole thing. And the gentleman talking about it was standing next to a pump way off in the background. And it's just crazy how every year more and more you're able to carve out dialogue out of background noise, because all the frequencies run into each other with your voice and that pump, but you're able to pull it out. Just a quick old man story. I worked at a company in Hollywood, Florida called VTA, and it was Videotape Associates. And one of the owners was a genius, and he came to me, and I can't remember his name offhand. And he says, "Hey, you want to see this cool thing I was working on?" He had his Apple IIe all hooked up and everything. And he says, look at this. And he points at a guy standing there in the video, and he's turning his knob and he's changing the color of his tie. And he says, isn't this great? And I go, yeah, what are you gonna call this invention? He goes, I'm gonna call it Da Vinci. So that was back in the early 80s. So that's 20 years ago, 25. It's crazy how it evolves so fast, and what you can do now versus what you could have done when it first got introduced, when we started using little digital audio tapes for recording 2 tracks of audio. So it's amazing, especially with picture now, and the involvement of the biggest thing that I'm seeing now is, I think you did a thing in it with View, where we're doing mostly 360 car shots on stage. It eliminates camera cars, and it eliminates people getting hurt, and eliminates only allowed having 5 people or 9 people on a camera car and flying off the thing. I mean, I've been on a camera car so many times, but now you're just able to go on a nice, cool stage and surround yourself with screens and be able to pull off the same thing. So that's where I see it. It's pretty nuts where it's all going. And back to the real, just a previous question with school. This whole school thing with the arts is in its infancy. It's so young, and there's going to be a time where it's going to catch up to it, where my generation's gone. And now you're going to have a college education to get into filmmaking. I mean, it's still evolving. Filmmaking started in the 20s, and how you got ahead is one person taught another person taught another person. And that's how it evolved. And it's still that way. But now we're seeing more and more people going to Full Sail, going to UCF, going to Florida State, learning film programs, all these film programs coming up in schools where they never did before. You got SCAD, who specializes in that. So it's going to be before too long that everybody on a set's going to have a college degree in order to get into it. I think not only for education, but it was sort of like the Wild West, and now it's kind of tamed itself. There's rules and there's regulations, and I think the younger generation, like Jennifer and Carla, who I worked with on Bad Monkey, I mean, they're by the book. Carla is so by the book, but that's how she learned, and that's good. Back in the day, you used to be able to go to the camera truck and have a drink of whiskey after the end of the day, but you can't do that anymore. because of lawsuits and everything else. So it's changing. It's changing is what my point was. So everything is changing. And change is good.
Yeah. Yeah, well, you know, change is change. The only thing that's consistent is change, right?
That's it.
Sean, I want to ask you, we got a good question in the chat box here. Any special skills needed as an AC with LED background wall technology that Joe had mentioned?
Any skills? You know, no specific skills, but you know, when you're dealing with LEDs, you know, a lot of times you get strobing, you know, on the image. So so you have to test and look out for you know, different light sources now. Typically, we start scrolling through shutter angles if we see some sort of flickering involved. So it's just looking out. You know, it's covering your tracks. Worst thing that can happen is you shoot, and all of a sudden you don't necessarily see it with the naked eye in real time through a Teradek or through a BNC cable onto a monitor. A lot of times you have to roll the camera, and because you know, you might see it then. It might not pick up to the naked eye at first. So if we're shooting some sort of LED wall or whatever, you know, having the camera in sync with it, you know, is a must. And you can only do that by, you know, being aware and looking out for it, you know, having the other guys in your DIT looking out for it, you know, and like I said, the safest thing to do is to roll the camera and watch playback, you know, and look at, we use scopes a lot to look at things because sometimes even with your naked eye, you don't really see it. So we'll have like a waveform, you know, on a monitor, and sometimes you see the strobing on that, and you kind of know it's there. And then just trying to figure out how to eliminate it.
And Sean, I want to stick with you for one thing. You had mentioned earlier some of your underwater work. Is there a difference in your role or your tasks when you're working underwater versus on, you know, on land?
That's a good question. Yes, the answer is yes, but you know, I have a lot of people come up to me as probably more than anything, hey, how can I get into underwater? And typically it's somebody who's never worked as a camera assistant or a camera operator. How I explained, you know, is the first AC roles, it does not change with underwater. You have to be an assistant or an operator first and foremost. You know, you're still dealing with the same technology. The cameras are the same, the lenses are the same. You still have to know the basics before you can just jump into underwater. You know, and then once you know those basics, then you basically are just protecting the cameras, you know, in an underwater housing. Obviously, you have to know those underwater housings, the nuances of them, and then there are certain aspects that start to change. Focus changes, you know, the physics change. Shooting on dome ports and flat ports, focus shifts, and you kind of have to know. And by knowing, you do a lot. Still do a lot of testing. You know, if you're shooting anamorphics and you're shooting with a dome port, you have to typically shoot with diopters because anamorphic lenses don't focus close enough for a dome port. And you know, we still on every job, you know, we do a lot of testing, and then covering your tracks, because if you have a catastrophe, water's unforgiving. You know, especially on the new digital gear. You know, you get any water, salt water, fresh water on a digital camera or in a lens, you know, they're done pretty much for the most part. So, you know, just doing all your checks and balances, you know, O-rings, everything's sealed properly. And then shooting underwater, you know, people think you know, it sounds romantic, you know, it's beautiful. You go in and you know, you're in this underwater environment, and these beautiful fish are floating around. It's very physical. It's a very physical job. You're dealing with the elements. You're dealing with current. If you're in the open ocean, you're dealing with sea creatures. If you're in the open ocean, you know, swell, being on the boat, working off of boats. You know, it's a very physical job. I like the physicality part of it. It's probably my favorite aspect of it. It's typically challenging, but I don't know if did I answer the question?
Yeah, no, that was great. That was yeah, no, that was good. Jennifer, I want to jump down to you and ask you a question. I don't think, Captain Obvious here, you're the only female here on this panelist. I know there are more women in the camera department now than there were in the past, but what's it like being a female in the camera department?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely, there are a lot more women now than when I started. That's a loaded question. I don't, I think I was naive in the very beginning of my career, and I don't know, I came from, I guess, a household where I felt like anything was possible. And I definitely hit a little resistance, more with the physicality. I think in the beginning of my career, some of the jobs I missed out on were because people didn't think I could physically do them. And so in my head, I had to compensate and prove that I could do the job. And I probably did some not very smart things early on. I might have a little lower back pain now because of that. But once I became more comfortable with what I was doing, once I learned the job, and once I met people, the Miami community is amazing. It's never been an issue in Miami. If you can do the job, that's basically the only requirement. If I'm not getting calls, it's not because I'm a woman down here. It's for something else. Everyone's super supportive. I think it's a really good team atmosphere down here. And it's nice to see more women joining the forces. And me and Carla as well, another camera assistant that I work with, have often talked about mentoring women coming up and teaching them, some of the things that we've learned along the way. We work specifically more in like some of the high end markets, and it'd be great to have more women kind of come up the ranks and sort of work in that field as well. But it's not quick, it's slow. There's a lot that goes into it. It's not immediate gratification. And so, if there's someone out there who's patient and willing to put in the work, I'd love to pay it forward and, bring up some more women. But my experiences, for the most part, I've been very fortunate and very blessed. They've been positive. That's
awesome. We're running low a little bit on time, but I want to just go once around the grid here and get everybody to give us, a fun story or a disaster story, whatever you prefer. Just pick a project that you worked on in the past and kind of give us a memorable story, a brief story. Go ahead, Michael, we'll start with you.
Oh my gosh. Well, I've had the opportunity with my podcast where I interview production sound mixers from around the world. I get to hear all kinds of crazy stories, and I always ask them, what's your worst on-set experience? And I had a gentleman that they were in the snow, they were shooting all day, and the director asked him to stay a little longer as they were taking everybody out with locals on snowmobiles. And he was the last one there, and he was getting the sound. And he waited and waited, and nobody came back to get him. And so he started walking, and he said he got to the point where he's telling himself, just lay down just for a little while, just you're tired, lay down. And he kept going, and he made it back to the location finally, but they had to airlift him out, and he had frostbite everywhere, and it all turned out okay, but a horrible story.
Yeah, don't forget about the audio people.
Exactly.
Joe, give us a story from one of your favorite projects.
So I'll try to summarize it the best I can, but on Miami Vice, we had this car called the Testarossa. And it was at the very beginning stages where Nagra introduced a timecode Nagra, which had a timecode built in, and it was a stereo machine, had 2 channels. So Don got this idea that he wanted to just free drive it throughout the city when he did his scenes with Philip. So I wanted to be advanced a little bit, and I bought the stereo machine and I put it in, they took off all the body pieces off the Testarossa, and they built a speed rail with black, and they had 3 cameras, 2 mounted on the front, crossing at Don and Philip, and then there would be an over from Don onto Philip, and then they'd swap the camera around and do it the other way on another run. But I mounted the machine inside the car underneath the cameras in the front, and then we ran switches to the dashboard. We ran switches to turn all the cameras on and on the audio recorder. So Don was really good about doing those things. So anyway, back in Universal Studios where we were doing the post in California, I got a phone call from a gentleman by the name of Bill Varney, and he was the head of sound at Universal Studios. And I'm getting this phone call. And he goes, yeah, I need you to come out to LA. This is before Zoom. And he goes, I need you to come out to California. If you're going to do the next season, you got to come out here. And I go, okay, fine. So I booked the plane ticket, flew out, sat in his office. He looks at me and he brings in all the sound editors. There was 3 of them. And again, they edited on flatbeds back then for my device. And he says, all the car scenes, I only have 1 channel of Don. I can't hear Philip at all. And I go, well, I used a stereo machine. He goes, what do you mean a stereo machine? He said, I said a stereo Nagra. And then each track had Don and the other track had Philip. So they were processing it as if it was a mono tape. So he says, well, why didn't you tell somebody? But I did. It was on the box. So he sent one of the editors to go get the box, a reel of tape, which is a 5-inch reel. And on it said track 1, Don, track 2, Philip. And he looked at it and he looked at his guys. And I could swear one of the guys got fired that day. But I ended up flying back and did season 4 then at that time. Quick story, introduction to 2 channels of audio.
Always read the box. There's important notes there.
That's it.
Sean, how about a good story from you?
There's a lot, but I'm probably going to tell a story that I think most of the people on here are maybe coming in, trying to get into the field, and it's a beginning story. So I was probably on my 2nd job ever, and I had only worked on smaller. So I'd only loaded 16 millimeter. I was always in the camera department. This is, film, we're in a bag or a dark room. I'd only loaded like a 16 SR camera. So I moved to Miami. I call every production coordinator we used to have the film book, the production guy. So I called everybody, and I finally got a call back from a guy named Jim Bigham, who's I don't know if he's still working, but a good guy, Jim. And so he asked me what I was interested in. I said, well, I've been in the camera department. He's like, well, I need a camera PA on this commercial. I said, I'd love to do it. So they hired me as his camera PA. So I was super green. I go and I pick up the camera. He said, the first thing you're gonna do is pick the camera department up and bring him to the prep at Cinevideotech. So I said, okay, I didn't really even know Miami that well. This is before we had iPhones and Google Maps and stuff. So I go pick up this team, and they're all from Japan. It's a Japanese group. And the second spoke very broken English, and he was the only one who spoke English. And in Japan, it's a different structure. The DP is the operator. The first assistant calls to stop, has a light meter, actually does the exposure, and the second pulls focus and loads. So it's different. So I pick these guys up. We go into the rental house, and I start talking to the rental house guys because I want to get into cameras. So I'm like, hey, can I load a 35 millimeter bag, every 3 or 4 35? So they're kind of showing me, and the second sparks interest, and he's like, well, what's your position on our shoot? I go, well, I'm a camera PA. He's like, well, you're loading. He wanted to not load, so I kind of sat there, and I just kind of took the bull by the horns and said, okay, great, no problem. So I had never loaded 35 millimeter before at this point, and it was a little, obviously it was very nervous. So I took a mag home with the dummy load, and I borrowed a bag from the rental house, and I sat there for hours, didn't sleep, because I was so nervous loading this 35 millimeter magazine. So we go on the job. We're shooting 130 frames per second. And I'm in the bag. I'd never done an inventory. I didn't know what it was. And I've got all this film stock. And typically, you want your loader out on the set, especially if it was a baseball commercial with Mike Piazza of Komatsu. I remember it very vividly. And you want all hands on deck because they're moving around the whole infield of the baseball stadium. So typically you load mags, you come out with 6 mags loaded and you help out however you can with the reload. And then when you get down to 3 or 4 mags, you go back, or better yet, you're on set with the bag on a cart. So you're right there, anticipating everything. So I'm running back and forth between the camera truck, which is all the way in the outfield. And the second got very upset. You know, I think he had forgotten that I was a camera PA. And he goes, where have you been? You know, 3 minutes in the bag for each mag. You're 30 minutes for every mag. And all I could do was keep up. You know, I was just trying to keep up. Long story short, we wrap. I get through the job. You know, I make it through. I've got no inventory, nothing. They come back to the camera truck and they look in the camera truck, and I probably have 50 short ends stacked up, labeled with tape. So I'd only worked on small budget films where you saved every ounce of film, every foot you would save because, you know, it costs money, you know, $400 for a roll of film, basically. Well, I had saved every short end, whether it was 5 feet, 10 feet, 50 feet, where typically you throw away anything 100 feet or less, which is what was taking me so long. So this second goes on, the first, and he picks it up, and in Japanese, he's like showing all the other guys, what the heck, you know, basically, what the heck is this guy doing? He saved 5 feet of film. He started throwing the cans out the back of the truck onto the ground. Anyway, and you know, and then obviously I didn't do an inventory, which I got scolded. So this is for all the people trying to get into the industry. You know, sometimes you got to take a risk and take the opportunities. And it led to my next job. I got hired by Jim Bigham again because all the film was fine, the exposure was fine. I figured out, you know, how to do a rudimentary inventory. But you know, take the opportunities, I guess, is the moral of the story that you're given, and run with them. You know, maybe not go in over your head like I did at that point, take that big of a risk. But anyway, I thought that was just I'll never forget it because it was my first, you know, my first experience on set, you know, in the camera department. So
Fun story. Jen, how about you? You got a good story for us from one of your projects?
Well, to continue with Sean's lessons from our stories, mine would be based on set awareness. I was working on Bloodline, and I was loading on that job, and they were shooting on a barely a road out in the Everglades for the scene. So production vehicles couldn't be anywhere near where we were actually physically shooting, and base camp is where the camera truck was, which was a good 5-minute van ride from set. So on set, helping out as best I can, and we needed to reload, took a card back to the base camp, back to the camera truck. When I left set, they had a rubber alligator on the road that the main character hit with a car. So it was fake blood and this rubber beast laying on the road, and they were just shooting around the alligator and getting shots of talent. I go to base camp and offload media and then make my way back to set to help. And when the van pulled up, I wasn't, and I should at this point, you should be paying attention to your surroundings regardless. But sometimes, you know, you have things in your head that you are asked to do, and you want to go back and report to people, and you don't always want to do everything over the walkie. So you're looking for people when you get to set. And so I landed on set and I went over to the camera team, not noticing they had since changed the rubber alligator out with a live alligator. And thank God production was watching, because I got tackled by a PA. I went to walk right across a live alligator, and a PA saw me and yanked me back and probably saved my life that day. And it was a good reminder to just always be aware of your surroundings, because in leaving and returning, a lot had changed. And because it was the same set and it looked so familiar, I maybe wasn't as careful as I probably should have been when that van pulled up. So that would be my lesson of the day, to piggyback on Sean.
Yeah, good advice. Avoid the live alligators. That's always good. So before we do a wrap up, Carla, I know you are on here. If you want to raise your hand so I can see where you're at, because I want to spotlight you for a second, since this topic was your idea, if she's around. But in the meantime, Carla, go ahead and raise your hand with the hand raising function so I can see if you get a chance. But in the meantime, All right, everybody, go around and plug anything you need to. Website, Michael, I know you got a podcast you got to talk about. Tell people how they can get in touch with you if you want that. So Michael, go ahead, you go first.
You can find me, I'm michaelthesoundguy.com. You can find me online, and my podcast is the Location Sound Podcast, and you can find it wherever you listen to podcasts.
Excellent. Jennifer?
I'll go ahead and actually plug Carla. She was supposed to be here today and couldn't, so I'm kind of just filling in for her. Talk about women in film. She's pretty much done it all at a very high level, and she's represented us all very well in not just Miami, across the board. So I'm gonna go ahead and plug Carla Sosa. I'm gonna say she's probably one of the, if not the best second AC that I personally know. So that'll be my plug.
Excellent. Excellent. Carla, go ahead and turn your camera on so we can pull you down here so people can say hi. All right, Joe, go ahead and anything you want to give out, website, email, anything people should know about you.
The name of my company is Southeast Audio Services, Southeast being Florida. And I've been in business since 1989. My website is southeastaudioservices.com. I'm available for events you may have that anybody needs someone to come and discuss sound with. Be more than happy to do it now that the writer's strike has sort of put everything on hold for a while. But yeah, I'll be more than happy to come in and do that for anybody that has some younger people coming into the business. And I have all the gear so I can bring it with me and demonstrate it.
Awesome. Carla, I don't know if you can take yourself off mute. I know you're on set, but just say hi. And just wanted to say thanks for bringing the topic to us. Okay.
You guys hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Hi, I'm on set in the Keys. I'm so sorry I couldn't do it. Obviously, I had amazing representation with Jen and Sean, and it was. I think it's important for people to learn and see what camera systems do, and it's always interesting to hear different stories and learn what everyone does. So I think it was really fun. I was able to listen to half of it, so I'm sorry I couldn't join you guys, but it was really great. I think everyone killed it. Hi, Joe.
That's all right. We work is most important. So we're glad that you couldn't join us because you're getting paid. That's the most important thing. So Sean, last thing for you, go ahead and plug anything you want to talk about.
I just, I'm at FlowCam, which is my rental house in South Florida. I see Sandy on here, Leiterman, her son, Adam, worked with me for 3 years, and he's out. He's what Jen and I talked about, coming through rental houses and learning the camera trade. Adam's a prime example. He's in LA working all the time. He's a DIT now. And he came through here, and I missed something. He was very invaluable. And you can, anybody who's on here who's interested in camera, certainly give me a call. Or Carla and Jen are wonderful resources as well. They're I consider the two best in the business down here as seconds. I use them both. Ask those. When I said learn from the right people, those are two people that you can definitely learn from. And that's pretty much it. And I appreciate this as well. And it was nice hearing from the other guys, Joe and the other sound. Sorry, I forgot your name. Or Michael, Joe and Michael, listening to their aspect and all their knowledge, and Joe's got obviously a giant history in the industry. So it was nice to be on the panel with those guys. So
excellent. Well said. Well said. So that's going to wrap up another edition of Film Florida Friday. Thanks to Sean, Joe, Michael, Jen, and Carla for her quick cameo, for being with us today, and all of you for joining us. And thanks to our assistant, Katie Collins, for helping me wrangle everything for Film Florida each month. We're going to take some time off for the summer. We're going to be back in September, so be on the lookout in August for the registration links and email blast for our next topic. I want to thank all of our Film Florida members for their continued support. I mention this every month because it's so important. If you're not a member of Film Florida, we hope you'll consider joining the organization at filmflorida.org. Our organization is funded entirely by our members, so our ability to do any of these type of things is dependent upon the support we receive through membership. You can also make a donation of $20.23 for our 2023 fundraising campaign. You can find that link in the chat box or on our website. Keep up with everything we're doing on social media. Make sure you check out our podcast on Apple, Google, Stitcher, iHeartRadio app, a couple other places. Thanks again for being here and have a great summer, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.